The Hargreaves family appeared flawless from the outside. A spacious suburban home, immaculately kept gardens, luxury cars in the driveway, and weekend barbecues that made the neighbors smile politely. To anyone passing by, Richard and Evelyn Hargreaves had it all: wealth, charm, and the kind of picture-perfect marriage most people envied. Evelyn had married Richard 5 years after the death of her first husband. She had a daughter, Lila, from that marriage. Lila was 19, a bright college sophomore studying journalism, fiercely independent and full of ambition. Evelyn had always put Lila first, her every decision shaped by the desire to give her daughter stability and happiness. At first, their blended family seemed ideal. Richard was attentive and kind to Lila, buying her small gifts and taking her out for dinners, trying to earn the role of stepfather with charm and generosity. Evelyn believed she had found a man who would love her and care for her daughter in equal measure. But over time, Evelyn began to notice unsettling signs. Whispered conversations between Richard and Lila when Evelyn entered the room, lingering glances that made her stomach twist, the way Lila's laughter occasionally sounded forced around him. She dismissed it at first, blaming fatigue or imagination, but unease crept in like a shadow she couldn't shake. One afternoon, Evelyn returned home early from a business trip. The house was quieter than usual. The air smelled faintly of perfume, an unfamiliar floral scent that made her pause. Upstairs, she thought she heard a muffled noise. Her heart began to race. She approached Lila's room and noticed the door was slightly ajar. Peering inside, her world shattered. Richard and Lila were naked, wrapped together, mouth to mouth and legs inside each other. Evelyn froze, every instinct screaming at her to run, to scream, to intervene, but for a long, suspended moment, she simply watched. The betrayal cut deeper than she could have imagined, slicing through the years of trust she had placed in both of them. Her mind raced. How long had this been going on? How had she missed the signs? How could her own daughter and husband betray her so completely? Without thinking, Evelyn fled the house, driving aimlessly through the city streets, the night air filled with chaos in her mind. Every light seemed to mock her, every passing car a reminder of the life she had built, now collapsing. By dawn, she returned home, forcing herself to act normal. The house felt different now. Smaller, oppressive, dangerous. Evelyn knew she needed time to plan, to decide how to respond, but one thought burned clearly in her mind. She would not allow them to get away with it. In the following days, Evelyn buried her emotions beneath the mask of normalcy. She greeted Richard as usual, pretended the night had never happened, but her eyes were constantly observing him. Every phone call, every text she glimpsed, she filed away mentally. Richard, unaware that Evelyn knew, continued his charade. He kissed her goodbye in the mornings, planned dinners and weekend trips, all while maintaining his affair in secrecy. Lila, on the other hand, had grown withdrawn. Her laughter came less easily. Her eyes darted away when Evelyn entered the room, and the tension between them all thickened into an almost tangible fog. Evelyn began meticulously documenting everything. Photos of Richard leaving her office late, snippets of messages she discovered on his devices, every suspicious conversation. She watched how they interacted, noting the way Lila avoided her gaze and how Richard's words carried the faintest edge of guilt when he thought she wasn't paying attention. As the evidence mounted, so did Evelyn's resolve. She wanted more than confrontation. She wanted revenge that would shake both Richard and Lila to their core. Her plan was to dismantle them completely, leaving no trace that could be traced back to her. One afternoon, while Richard was at work, Evelyn invited Lila into the kitchen. Her voice was calm, controlled, as though nothing was wrong. "Lila," she began, "is there something you need to tell me?" Lila's face drained of color. "No, Mom," she whispered, eyes flicking nervously. Evelyn leaned in, her gaze piercing. "I know about you and Richard." The room went silent, the kind of heavy, suffocating silence that presses against the skin. Lila's eyes filled with tears, and she stammered out apologies. "I don't want to hear it," Evelyn said quietly, but the edge in her tone cut through the room like a blade. "You've made your choices, and now you'll have to live with them." Lila's sobs were sharp and ragged. "Mom, please. I didn't mean. He said he loved me." Evelyn's heart twisted, a mixture of sorrow and fury. "He's a liar." And now, because of him, we all suffer. You and he underestimated me. You thought I wouldn't see. But I see everything. The tension in the house escalated. Richard tried multiple times to reach her, to explain, to charm, but Evelyn's patience had hardened into calculated strategy. She spent her days at work, avoiding coming home, and her nights planning every detail of her retaliation. Lila was a wreck, torn between guilt and desire. She had betrayed her mother and was trapped in her own feelings for Richard, unable to stop the toxic cycle she had been drawn into. Evelyn's plan began to take shape fully. She would dismantle Richard and Lila's world piece by piece, exposing their lies, turning their betrayal into ruin. But she would do it methodically, ensuring no suspicion fell on her. Finally, one evening, after Lila had gone to her room, Evelyn confronted Richard in his study. A single lamp cast long shadows across the room. She laid out the evidence. Messages, everything. Richard went pale, the smile fading from his face. "Grace," he tried to begin. Evelyn cut him off, voice steady and cold. "Don't you dare explain this away. I know everything." Richard opened his mouth, but no words came. He was trapped, exposed, powerless. "Why?" Evelyn demanded. "Why betray me, betray us?" Richard's voice was barely audible. I didn't mean. It just happened." Evelyn's laugh was low, bitter. "It happened. Your choices destroyed everything. You destroyed the family. And now, you'll see what happens when I choose my path." She turned and left the study, leaving him to the shadows, her mind already orchestrating every next move. There would be no mercy. She would be precise, calculated, and lethal in her revenge. Not with violence, but with ruin. As she climbed the stairs to her bedroom, Evelyn felt a cold clarity of purpose settle over her. The betrayal had been brutal, but it had awakened a darker, more determined side of her. And she intended to make Richard and Lila pay. Every secret, every lie, every stolen moment, they would crumble beneath her strategy. This was just the beginning. The weeks following Evelyn's confrontation with Richard had been tense, every moment in the Hargreaves household thick with unease. Evelyn had perfected her mask of normalcy, going about her day with a calm exterior while her mind whirred with plans, strategies, and possibilities for revenge. But nothing had prepared her for the shock that would strike again. It began with subtle signs, the kind that gnawed at her subconscious until she could no longer ignore them. Lila's laughter, once nervous and infrequent, had grown quieter, softer. Richard's eyes flickered whenever Evelyn entered a room, brief flashes of guilt and fear. And yet, neither had admitted to the obvious truth. They had not stopped. Evelyn had hoped her confrontation would have ended the affair. She had assumed Richard, faced with undeniable evidence, would retreat. But a darker pattern had begun to emerge. The momentary fear she saw in him during that confrontation had shifted to audacity. Lila, emboldened by her stepfather's continued deceit, had resumed the affair, thinking her mother would remain ignorant. One late evening, Evelyn returned home earlier than usual. She had claimed a sudden change in her work schedule, an unplanned meeting she had managed to cancel, and now she stood in the quiet house, the kind of silence that pressed against her chest like a physical weight. The living room was empty, the faint glow of the streetlights filtering through the curtains. She moved quietly, instinctively following the familiar pattern of the house, her steps measured and deliberate. And then she heard it, a muffled sound, intimate and unmistakable, coming from Lila's room. Evelyn's heart slammed in her chest, rage and disbelief flooding through her. Her fingers tightened into fists as she approached the slightly ajar door. Peeking inside, her blood ran cold. There they were, together again. Richard and Lila, entwined in a moment of stolen passion, utterly oblivious to the world outside. The sight struck Evelyn like a physical blow, and a low, cold fury settled over her. She stepped back, her mind racing. How could this continue? How could they be so reckless, so utterly disrespectful? The betrayal had deepened, cutting further than before. And yet, she knew she had to control herself. She could not act impulsively, not yet. For a long moment, Evelyn simply watched. Her eyes burned with the knowledge of their duplicity, and with each passing second, Her anger solidified into a meticulous resolve. This time, there would be no mercy, no hesitation. She would make them pay in a way that would destroy them utterly. She retreated to her bedroom quietly, shutting the door behind her. There, she allowed herself a brief moment to breathe, to let the initial shock pass, but her mind never stopped working. She would gather proof, more incontrovertible evidence this time, and then confront them both together. Not in anger, but with cold precision. The following days were a careful dance. Evelyn watched, taking note of every glance and whispered conversation. She documented everything: the text messages, the late-night meetings, the subtle signs of deception. Lila became increasingly withdrawn, but Evelyn's presence, once merely maternal, now radiated an unspoken threat. Lila sensed it, even if she did not yet comprehend the full depth of her mother's wrath. Then came the confrontation. Evelyn had waited until the household was quiet, the kind of quiet that made every sound feel amplified. Richard was reading in the study, and Lila was in her room, ostensibly studying. Evelyn had planned this carefully, timing her approach so that there could be no escape, no pretense of ignorance. She knocked on Lila's door softly. "Lila," she said, her voice steady, controlled. "Come here." Lila hesitated, suspicion flickering in her eyes. She entered the hallway, avoiding her mother's gaze. Evelyn guided her gently but firmly into the living room, where Richard now looked up, sensing something was about to happen. "I thought we had talked about this," Evelyn began, her tone calm but icy. "I thought I made myself clear." Richard's face paled. He tried to speak, but Evelyn's gaze held him in place. Lila's eyes were wide, her lips trembling. "Mom, she began, but Evelyn cut her off with a quiet, deliberate hand gesture. "No," Evelyn said firmly. "I want the truth. Right now." The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Lila whispered, It just happened. I didn't mean to." Evelyn's expression hardened. "It happened again," she said, almost to herself, her voice chillingly calm. "Even after everything, you thought you could deceive me." Richard's lips parted, but no words came. He was trapped, fully exposed under the icy gaze of the woman he had underestimated twice. Evelyn's fury simmered beneath her surface, but outwardly she remained composed. She had learned from the first time, she would not lose control, not again. Instead, she began to outline, quietly, the consequences of their actions. She would take every step necessary to ensure they could never escape the repercussions of their betrayal. "You've crossed a line neither of you can come back from," she said softly, her voice like steel wrapped in silk. "And now, it's time for you to see what happens when I decide the rules." Lila sobbed, hiding her face in her hands. Richard's eyes flicked nervously between mother and daughter, realizing for the first time that Evelyn's patience and concealment had only been a veneer. Beneath it lay a predator, calculating and unrelenting. Evelyn left the room then, retreating to her sanctuary, already planning the next moves. She knew she had to be methodical. This betrayal, twice committed, had made her colder, sharper, more dangerous than ever before. And for the first time, Richard and Lila truly understood that there would be no escape, no forgiveness, no simple resolution. Evelyn Hargreaves was no longer just a mother or a wife. She was a force of retribution, and they were her prey. The night stretched on, heavy and suffocating, the silence of the house filled with anticipation. Evelyn could feel the weight of her plans settling into place. The game had escalated, and the stakes were higher than ever. This time, there would be no mercy. The house had changed. Where once it had felt safe and orderly, it now seemed like a labyrinth of secrets and whispers. Every corner held a memory of betrayal, every room a silent witness to the duplicity of Richard and Lila. Evelyn moved through it like a shadow, quiet, calculated, and entirely aware of the power she now held. The morning after catching them together again, she sat at the kitchen table with a notebook, meticulously recording every detail. The timing of their encounters, the subtle signs of their deception, every text and email she had captured. Her handwriting was neat, precise, each line a marker of strategy, a blueprint for the ruin she intended to bring. Her first step was isolation. She subtly shifted Richard's schedule, creating small conflicts in his daily routine that left him tense, off balance, and more likely to make mistakes. She encouraged Lila to spend time outside the house under seemingly casual pretenses, ensuring she could observe and document her movements without interference. Evelyn's patience was endless. Every day, she reinforced the illusion of normalcy. She smiled at Richard in the mornings, made polite conversation, and even complimented Lila when she tried to behave obediently. But beneath the surface, she was watching, calculating, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. It came unexpectedly, on a rainy Thursday evening. Evelyn had returned home early from work, citing a fabricated client emergency. The house was silent, the gray light from the storm casting long shadows across the polished floors. She moved instinctively toward Lila's room, her ears catching the faint sound of Richard's voice, low, intimate, unmistakable. Evelyn froze outside the door, a bitter sense of déjà vu coursing through her. She had seen this scene twice now, and both times it had left her reeling. But this time, she did not retreat. She did not hesitate. She opened the door slowly. There they were again, Richard and Lila, lost in each other, reckless, careless. Evelyn's eyes burned with fury, but her expression remained composed, almost serene. "Really?" she said softly, her voice carrying through the room like a blade. Richard and Lila jerked apart, their faces pale and eyes wide. Evelyn took a step inside, closing the door behind her, trapping them. "After everything, you thought you could continue this?" Richard tried to speak, but no words came. Lila covered her face, trembling. Evelyn's voice dropped, calm, measured, and terrifying in its control. "I could have exposed you both the first time. I could have destroyed everything immediately. But I didn't. I watched. I waited. And now you will see the consequences of your choices." She retrieved a folder from the hallway, a collection of photos, text screenshots, emails, and recorded conversations. "Everything you've done, every lie, every secret, I've documented. And I've made arrangements so there's no escape." Richard's hands shook. "Evelyn, please, we can stop this. We can fix it." Evelyn laughed quietly, a sound devoid of warmth. "Fix it? You destroyed us. You destroyed me. There is no fixing it. You only understand now that I am in control." She turned to Lila. "And you will see that your actions have consequences beyond your understanding. Your choices, your rebellion, your betrayal, everything will lead to ruin. Not just for you, but for both of you." Days passed, each filled with a tense, silent atmosphere. Evelyn's subtle manipulations began to take effect. Richard made mistakes at work, minor at first but noticeable, each one carefully documented and strategically used to increase his stress. Lila's social circle began to hear rumors, carefully seeded by Evelyn in whispers that suggested scandal and impropriety. Evelyn herself never appeared overtly threatening. She smiled, she moved, she acted normally. But in every action, she exercised control. Every glance she gave, every phrase she uttered, reinforced their growing sense of dread. They were trapped, and they knew it. One evening, Evelyn orchestrated a seemingly innocent gathering, a small dinner party with a few neighbors. Richard and Lila, nervous and on edge, were subtly baited into moments of discomfort and exposure. Evelyn's precision was flawless. Conversations were steered to topics that forced Richard to reveal tiny inconsistencies in his stories. Lila's anxiety made her fidget and blush at the wrong moments. Neighbors noticed. Some whispered. Evelyn pretended ignorance. That night, after the guests left, Evelyn finally confronted them together. She laid out the timeline of their transgressions, connecting every lie and deceit, highlighting their recklessness, and pointing out every opportunity they had squandered to act responsibly. "Do you see now?" she said, her tone cold and unwavering. "Every choice, every act of betrayal, has consequences. And I am the one who will enforce them." Richard and Lila were silent, overwhelmed by the meticulousness of her plan and the inevitability of their predicament. Evelyn had not raised her voice, had not screamed or cried. She had done something far more powerful. She had demonstrated that she was fully in control, that she had anticipated every possible move, that escape was impossible. By the end of that night, the house was quiet once again. Evelyn retreated to her room, exhausted but satisfied. She knew the coming days would be crucial. She would continue to push them, to manipulate the situation until they had no choice but to face the full weight of their actions. For the first time, Evelyn felt a sense of calm. The storm of betrayal had begun to settle into a pattern she could control. Richard and Lila had finally realized the depth of her resolve. And Evelyn knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would not stop until the balance had been restored, until every lie had been exposed, and until she had ensured that neither of them could ever harm her or anyone she loved again. The game had escalated, and the pieces were in place. The next move, Evelyn knew, would change everything. The house was silent. The kind of silence that presses against the ears, heavy and suffocating. For weeks, Evelyn had orchestrated every detail, every interaction, every whisper, ensuring that Richard and Lila's world unraveled piece by piece. Now, she knew the time had come for the final move. Richard had grown tense, haunted by the inevitability of exposure. Every misstep at work, every whispered rumor among neighbors, had worn him down. Lila's anxiety was visible in every glance, every tremor in her hands. They were both teetering on the edge of panic, and Evelyn could sense it. She had planned everything meticulously. The timing, the alibis, the setup, it was flawless. This was not a crime of passion. It was the culmination of weeks of calculated revenge. Evelyn had learned from the past. There would be no hesitation, no mercy. It began in the study. Evelyn lured Richard there under the guise of discussing a minor household matter. Lila, naturally suspicious, followed, curious but wary. The room was dimly lit, the shadows stretching long across the walls. Evelyn closed the door behind her, her hands steady, her gaze unwavering. "I want this to end," she said quietly, her voice calm but carrying the weight of command. "All of it. The lies. The betrayals. Everything you've done." Richard opened his mouth, but no words came. He knew this tone, controlled, precise, dangerous. Evelyn had not screamed or cried. She had not begged. She had simply planned, and now she executed. "Lila," Evelyn continued, turning her attention to her daughter, "you think you're innocent because you were young, because you were in love. But love has nothing to do with this. This is about betrayal. And betrayal has a cost." The air was thick. Richard's eyes darted between Evelyn and Lila, searching for a lifeline, but there was none. He understood that every secret, every hidden act, was about to be weighed and paid for. Evelyn moved swiftly. In her hand was a small, heavy object she had kept hidden, something she had planned for weeks. She struck quickly, decisively. Richard crumpled silently, his eyes wide in disbelief, the life leaving him before he could react. Lila screamed, but Evelyn was faster, covering her mouth, her hands strong and unyielding. "This is the price of your betrayal," Evelyn whispered, her eyes cold and steady. Lila struggled, crying, pleading, but Evelyn's control was absolute. In a moment of horrifying clarity, Lila met the same fate as her father. Evelyn's hands were precise, measured, and merciless. When it was over, the house was still once again, but this time the silence was final. Evelyn stood in the study, her chest heaving, the gravity of her actions settling in. She had carried out her revenge, but she also understood the consequences. This was not a crime that could be undone, a step that could not be retraced. Evelyn moved carefully through the house, methodically cleaning, ensuring no trace remained that could tie her to the murders. Every photograph, every note, every subtle clue that had guided her plan was concealed or destroyed. She left nothing behind. Only the quiet emptiness of a home that had witnessed the ultimate betrayal and the ultimate justice in her eyes. Later, she sat in the living room, sipping tea as though nothing had happened. The weight of what she had done pressed on her, but beneath it was a sense of resolution, a dark satisfaction. Richard and Lila had underestimated her. They had believed their betrayal would go unpunished, that their secret was safe. But Evelyn had seen everything, calculated everything, and ensured the scales were balanced. In the days that followed, she presented herself as calm, composed, and grief-stricken, a widow mourning the sudden tragic loss of her husband and the shocking death of her daughter. Neighbors expressed sympathy, colleagues offered condolences, and law enforcement initially accepted the story at face value. Evelyn's meticulous planning ensured that her involvement would never be suspected. But inside, Evelyn knew the truth. She had acted not in blind rage, but in precise, cold retribution. The betrayal had demanded a price, and she had paid it, not with tears, not with words, but with decisive action. The house remained quiet, the kind of quiet that now felt permanent. Evelyn walked its halls alone, finally free from the weight of deceit, betrayal, and manipulation. She had been forced to confront the darkest side of human nature, the side that lives in shadows, in hidden desires, in the capacity for unimaginable betrayal. And in doing so, she had embraced her own darkness. For Evelyn Hargreaves, the nightmare had ended. But she would never forget. The lesson was carved into her very being. Betrayal is a debt, and she had collected it in full. The quiet was hers now, unbroken, eternal, and complete. Thanks for watching. Subscribe and like this video for more true crime video. Don't forget to leave your thoughts and theories in the comments section below. Take care and see you in the next video.